morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Howard. I'm joined with my group mates Mike West, Chase Skoda, and Roni Gorecki. And we're here today to present our project, designing and testing a microfluidic screening device for diabetes mellitus. So to quickly go through an overview of our project and what we're going to talk about today, we're going to start with background and motivation, move into the microcirculation system, talk about our proof of concept testing, go into the design considerations in our microfluidics device, and then end with the results that we had, and then conclusion and what where we're looking to take this further in next steps. So without further ado, let's get started. What is diabetes? Diabetes is an incurable disease that interferes with the body's ability to respond to or produce insulin, and that results in elevated levels of glucose. There are three main types of diabetes: type 1, type 2, and gestational diabetes. And in America, about 30 million people have diabetes, and it costs over $300 billion in the American healthcare system. And that's not including labor market impacts of diabetes, for example, absenteeism or reduced productivity in work. But that's just America. Globally, there are about 400 million people with diabetes as of 2013, and that's projected to go up to 600 million by 2035. So the problem is that a lot of people that don't see diabetes as that much of a deadly disease, such as HIV or AIDS or something like that. But this actually shows that diabetes is more deadly than something like HIV/AIDS. In fact, 3 times more deadly. And this is definitely a serious issue that we have to consider. The problem is that there's sort of that trickling effect also to diabetes patients, in that they don't take their diseases that seriously. A lot of times they say they feel fine and they don't understand the severity and magnitude of the complications of diabetes, which include symptoms which lead to discomfort in their daily lives, or comorbidities, which are other diseases present along with diabetes. And these include diseases such as hypertension, vascular complications, which lead to an increased chance of stroke or heart attacks, which increase your risk of death. So with that said, what we noticed was that there's no quick and easy method to detect diabetes right now. People either take a questionnaire or they go through different laboratory testing. And the laboratory tests are outlined here: A1C test, fasting plasma glucose test, and oral glucose tolerance test. But these tests are time-consuming and pretty costly. We noticed that there was no middle ground between diabetes tests, and that was the motivation for why we wanted to create a microfluidics screening device.
So yeah, before we can go into the specifics of our device, it's important to understand the biology and the fluid dynamics behind the device, or the microfluidics and the microcirculatory system. So here you can see the microcirculatory system and on the right-hand side of the screen. And the microcirculatory system consists of various vessels, such as the materials, the arterioles, and the capillaries, the good flow channel, and the precapillary sphincters. The big takeaway from this picture is in the top half you can see that the precapillary sphincters are open, and in the bottom half they are closed. When they're closed, the blood is only able to flow through the capillaries, and these capillaries are very small, ranging from 5 to 10 microns in diameter. And then you can see here, this big red circle, that the pressure in the capillaries is about 20 millimeters of mercury, which is about 2.6 kilopascals. So at that point, when the precapillary sphincters are closed, the pressure causes all the blood to flow through the capillaries at this high pressure, which causes such a very high flow rate. And this is the point of interest that we want to focus on. This is where clotting occurs, and this is where all the comorbidities that Howard spoke of occurs as well. So here you can see that if you look at it on the right-hand side, that blood does need to reorient itself in different ways, and it has the ability to do this in normal patients, because normal patients do not have a high glucose level in their blood cells, meaning that their blood cells are elastic and they can reorient themselves in the way it's seen here. Unfortunately, diabetic patients do not have this ability, as they have higher glucose levels, which cause their blood cells to stiffen. So blood flow is governed by the same equation as fluid flow in pipes, which is Poiseuille's equation, which is a function of the pressure drop, the viscosity, the length, and the inner radius. And we found the inner radius and the length of capillaries to be, like I said, 5 microns earlier, and then the length 5 millimeters. And then the pressure, as I mentioned earlier, was 2.6 kilopascals, and the viscosity of blood is 5 times 10 to the negative 3 pascal seconds. So using this calculation, we determined our volumetric flow rate, which is one of the governing principles in our test, to be 0.04 milliliters per minute. So given a roadmap on what we wanted to go through this semester, we wanted to, before we could make a device, we wanted to be able to create a sample and collection and treatment technique that was repeatable and accurate. And then we wanted to test this proof of concept that we could test that blood in diabetic patients wouldn't be able to go through these tight capillaries, but in normal patients they would, and we would be able to find that threshold. And then we wanted to make a device that would test this many times at once, which is through multiple parallel channels. So our sample collection and treatment technique was something we worked on, and it started off with, we went to the Yale Med School in John Hua's lab, and we collected our own blood, and within that time frame we had pretty much 2 hours before the blood started to coagulate. And we had to run experiments. And that was our biggest issue, is that our blood was coagulating, and therefore we were seeing clotting instead of clogging. And clogging is what we wanted to see, which is when the blood cells simply can't fit through. But we saw clotting, which is when the blood cells stick together and essentially they become bigger. So to counteract this, we did 2 things. First, we pre-treated our capillaries with a 1/1000 dilution of heparin in distilled water. And heparin is something that people who suffer from blood clots use to essentially use as an anticoagulant. And then essentially the pre-treatment is we ran this solution through our capillaries before we ran the blood through. So this pre-treatment was within the capillary by itself. And then additionally, we added a sodium citrate solution in a 1:10 ratio within the blood sample, which is another anticoagulant. And this worked as essentially giving more longevity to the blood than we took from ourselves, because the blood in our body is used to moving, and therefore it doesn't clot as easily. But when it's obviously outside the body and static, it clots more. So it needed this anticoagulant. And then one thing we needed to focus on was getting the difference between normal blood, which we all had, and then diabetic blood, which unfortunately we didn't necessarily have. So the biggest takeaway that I mentioned earlier about diabetic blood is that they have a higher glucose level, which is about 200 millimeters of mercury per deciliter. And to do this, we added 110 millimoles of glucose into in a 1:10 ratio, or in a citrate buffer sample of blood in a 1:10 ratio. And this gave us our 200 milligrams per deciliter of blood. So this was essentially our diabetic blood. And to help mix this, we incubated it for 5 minutes in a 37 degrees Celsius incubator.
Yeah, so going on then from after sample collection into our very first experiments that we ran, which was with the single capillaries to see whether what we think was happening was actually happening. So we did a proof of concept testing with micropipettes, really small glass capillaries, and basically it involved 3 steps: pulling the micropipettes, which actually was done for us very nicely from Garrett Nesky down at the Mid-Scott McCormick lab. But then he pulled the micropipettes to about 2 microns, the tip size, and then since we wanted to see where blood would clot and not flow through the microcapillaries, we had to change those tip sizes, which meant that we had to microforge micropipette tips, which we managed to do with Gilla, is over here very nicely. So I'll talk through both those sort of processes, and then also lastly actually go through our syringe pump flow test, which is how we determine whether clotting occurred or not. So as you can see, the micropipette tips, this is zoomed in quite a lot. They're very, very small and very delicate. This is sort of image taken through the microforger, and you bring the micropipette, sorry, I'm actually more organized, there we go. You bring the micropipette tip into contact with what this little bubble is, a filament that gets heated up. You have a little pad you can step on that heats the filament, and then, as you can see, it melts the glass, and with some careful pulling, you manage to break the tip off, which is actually pretty impressive, but quite hard, and Chase turned out to be the best at it. So he sort of forged all our tips for us pretty much at the end. So you can see you go from this image of a clean tip at 2 microns to something much bigger, like 143 microns, which actually is pulling harder, bigger tips was actually much harder than we thought it would be. It turned out that was a bit easier getting them down to about 20, 30 microns, and the really tiny ones like 7, 8 microns also really hard to do because it's just, if I go back for a second, it's just so tiny and these glass bubbles form. It's a bit difficult. So after making the tips, we were finally set in action with our samples to get things going. So we have the syringe pump that also we got from the OCG lab, I think is how you pronounce it, that we got to use. And as Mike said, it was really important to pre-treat our entire setup with heparin to make sure that the blood flow would actually go through as expected and it wouldn't clog, so we'd see clotting, which we don't want to see. So basically, we diluted our blood samples, as Mike said, and then we pre-treated the tube capillaries, and then very carefully sort of drew blood from our blood samples with a needle into the syringe, set it into the syringe pump, which we set at 0.04 microliters per minute, which, as Mike explained earlier, is sort of mimicking the actual microcirculatory system. And then we gently push the sample through that microcapillary right over there. Very slow process all the way through until it drops into the beaker or it doesn't. And then we observe whether clogging happen or not. Okay. So if you look at our proof of concept results then, we were very pleased. We got exactly what we expected given the biology of the body. As you can see, micropipette size at which blood clogged 2 microns. Both of them should be clogging because, as Mike said, red blood cells are about 6 to 8 microns in diameter. They're really squeezing through capillaries that are usually 5 microns. 2 microns is really small. Even air wouldn't push through. So 10 microns then, normal blood did not clog at all. It flowed through easily, as you can see all the way down this column. But the glycated blood clogged all the way down here, and we sort of experimented with different tip sizes to see where the clogging occurred and where it did. And as you can see, all capillaries were pre-treated and the constant flow rate was weak. Yes, so handing back to Howard now to talk about the challenges we ran into along the way.
Awesome, thank you. So during this proof of concept, we ran into several challenges. The first of which was that initially we didn't realize how sensitive these micropipette tips were. When you have sizes of 2 microns to 50 to 100 microns, they're very easy to break. So what we saw was when we pushed even liquids through these microcapillaries with a higher blood pressure or a higher pressure, the tips broke. Or if we just hit it slightly against a glass beaker, the tips broke. So we went through a lot of these micropipette tips. Another challenge was, as Mike and Ronnie described earlier, the concept of clotting versus clogging. And as it described, what we did to resolve that was to pre-treat our microcapillaries with heparin. Additionally, there was inconsistency in microforging. So when we microforged, we actually looked at a small scale or ruler, but we kind of eyeballed it, and we didn't know what the exact measurements were for the radii of these different micropipettes. But in order to resolve that, what we did was we imaged tips. So what this means was we took a scale, a grading scale under a microscope, and we took a picture of what the scale was. We took a picture of what these micropipettes were under the microscope too, and then went out to the computer and looked at the corresponding number of pixels to microns according to the scale, and then applied that conversion factor to our micropipettes in order to determine exactly what the radii of our micropipettes were. And that gave us more accurate numbers compared to just our assumed forges of 2, 5, 10 microns of sizes. And lastly, we had a constraint of resources, particularly time, because when we were running these blood samples experiments at about 0.4 milliliters per minute, that's a really slow flow rate. So each of our experiments took about 7 minutes, sometimes even longer, and we had to redo each of those experiments. So that was definitely something that was a challenge for us. And lastly, I'm going to turn it over to Chase to talk about the design considerations of this microfluidic device.
So after we proved our concept with the microcapillaries, we wanted to move on to a device that had a bunch of channels in parallel so that we could see repeated results on a mass scale that weren't one every 7 minutes, having to reforge a tip over and over again. The next stage that was quite difficult and we couldn't actually do is the fabrication stage. These devices are very complex, need a lot of machinery, so I'll go through that and how they're made, and then finally our results from our tests. So very first step is the design step. Layout Editor is the program that the Heidelberg machine uses in the next step of this process, and we created 4 different designs that were all the same in like concept. So they're all tapered channels, moving from 100 microns to either 10 or 5, and then we had long or short versions of either. The long version having the length of 60 millimeters and the short version having the length of 30. And they basically all go onto this glass mess, which we can pass around. So the fabrication process starts with a glass mask. It's just a piece of glass, and this Heidelberg machine etches on whatever design you want onto the glass. Then the next step is that this mask is placed on top of, there's a silicon wafer on the bottom, then there's a photoresist layer, which is SU8 in our case. It's put in between them, and then the glass plate on top. It's treated with UV light rays. And then, essentially, the photoresist reacts where it sees light and bonds to the silicon wafer on the bottom, which is right here.
We'll pass this out at the end.
The next step, so now you have this SU8 mold after the photo process, the UV process is done. You pour a PDMS liquid onto the mold, you let it cure, and then you peel it off. And you're essentially left with the top of your device because you're peeling it off the mold. And then you rebond it to a piece of glass. In our case, we just used microscope slides because they were convenient size. And then you're left with the final device. And so here's a picture of a couple of them. We'll pass out some of the used test ones so you can see what they look like. 100 channels in parallel, basically, and then you punch a hole at the end to put the tube in the blender layer. So here's a picture of what it looks like. For the actual test, we had a syringe pump that was a fancier version of the one we were using. The blood was put there, turn the pump on, blood goes through into the reservoir, and then slowly moves its way through the channels. It's kind of hard to see, it'll be easier when we pass the devices out. But the blood slowly makes its way all the way down and then uniformly stops at the end. So we ran a couple preliminary tests before to make sure we could figure out how things were going. Heparin was not good to use in this case because it just shot everything out the end. It was too good at its job. And the normal blood one was so consistent that I guess this method is just better than the micropipettes, and heparin wasn't needed. So here's the 2 tests, major comparisons. Here's my blood at normal glucose level, thankfully, and then the diabetic sample, the added glucose mixture is the next test. So here's the test with the normal blood, here's the test with the glycated blood. And not surprisingly, we found that the normal blood behaved in a uniform fashion, almost, to the dot, all the way down the device at a 4 micron radius, which you'll notice is smaller than what we designed for. So that making the mask, or making the PDMS devices was pretty challenging to get them to adhere because of the taper sizes. So we actually, Barak in alone, actually heated them for longer, which actually changed the size, which worked out well for us, to a little bit smaller radius for each channel. So the normal blood clotted at 4 pretty much uniformly, and the diabetic blood, or fake diabetic blood, clotted at a really odd range. I don't know if you can see right here, but so it kind of formed this bell-shaped curve, which is odd because in this test it just goes straight down the line. Pretty uniform all across. And for whatever reason, the outside decided to clot earlier, and the inside went to a larger radius than the normal blood. So a couple design considerations to consider. First, why we started at 100 microns was just we thought we'd have a long tapering to see where it went. We designed this a very long time ago. The fabrication process took a while, and if we had known exactly where it was, this is for future device designs, we would start at a smaller radius, make it a little longer so that these results are more apparent to the naked eye. And also the reservoirs, rocket problems with them collapsing because of their shape. We don't know much about microfluidic devices. We do now. We won't design that. Won't design it that way. But we want pillars so that they don't collapse and things are consistent. Back to Ron.
Great. Yeah, so just wrapping up then, way back when Howard started, just giving the sense again that diabetes really is a growing epidemic, and there's currently no low-cost screening device to really just alert patients, well, pre-diabetics or people who might be at risk for diabetes, that they are at risk, to sort of just tell them you should probably go to the doctor because something abnormal is happening. And this is especially important in low resource areas and poorer regions where access to clinicians is limited, which is why we wanted to fabricate a low-cost screening device. So as you can see here, we postulated that a microfluidic device mimicking capillaries, so the microcirculatory blood system could indicate diabetes incidence for highlighting the differences in red blood cells and how they flow through the small capillaries. And in that way, you could get a sense of who's at risk. So we did some proof of concept testing with the single capillary test, and then after showing that the sugary blood clots in wider channels, we took that to the next step to move into parallel channels, which is the device design to get better statistics and more reliable results. So then, after doing all of this, there are lots of things that we would like to do further as well. So firstly, more statistics are needed for further confirmation. We're pretty certain that these differences between diabetic and healthy red blood cells is very important in the way their fluid dynamics work. But it would be good to have more statistics to confirm that. And then also doing it with a larger blood population of blood samples. We use our own blood. I got sick along the way, so we couldn't even use my blood towards them, so who knows. So that's one of the things. And then something else that we haven't really mentioned throughout the presentation is finding a solution for extracting blood from the patient and directly feeding it into the device. That's another important design aspect that also should be considered along with the changes to the device that Chase already mentioned, and then also further honing the device, keeping in consideration business-related factors if this were to be taken out into the real world, just fabrication costs, packaging, also just investigating opportunities to lower the cost of production. So currently, working with Iraq, we figured out that it's about $10 per device for 100 devices. Coming from South Africa, I don't really think that's going to work very well, so it's definitely going to lower the costs even further. So these are the next steps, and then just going through acknowledgements, we really have a lot of people to thank for this project. There have been a lot of people helping us along the way. So firstly, just thank you to Professor Bennett for leading us in class, and Glenn, thank you so much for being there throughout and ordering everything for us. And then we have lots of different categories here. I don't know if I should run through all the names, but here you can see, I'll just keep it up for a second. Lots of people to thank who helped us with this project, and we're very grateful for their input. And if you have any questions, I'm going to take it back to our recommendations for next step slide. Great, thank you. And then lastly, just passing out everything.
That's all very impressive. My question is, what volume of blood were you using in your prototype device?
So we were using about 0.2 milliliters. It wouldn't all go through, obviously. I had it with cloth, so really the amount of blood wasn't that important. We were just shooting for eliminating waste.
Right, and you weren't using heparin, right?
We're not. We tried at first, but it would work too well. We weren't using heparin for the samples being passed around.
Is there any reason you chose to use PDMA over another syrup or syrup such as PMS? Or DMS over PMA, sorry.
So Barack just told us this is what we need to do with that. You see, I have fluidic devices, so why we chose to.
And PMS is also more commonly used for paper microfluidics application.
sensitive do you think your device is? Is it yes or no, or is it different levels? Let's say you have a low level of glucose in the blood versus healthy blood. Do you think it's good enough?
I think honestly, looking at the device and the way Chase highlighted, with healthy blood, it sort of made a straight line, and with the diabetic blood, it made the curve. I think it would be interesting for further steps to see at different glucose levels if that bell curve shape changes. But initially, we were just shooting for something that's a simple indicator, not necessarily diagnosing at all, just an indicator of this looks different from what's expected from healthy blood. Yeah.
I think it has a capability to get different levels based on how far the blood travels through, but we only had access to the 200 milligrams of glucose.
What was the pump or applicator you're using?
It's called a Harvard apparatus. It's essentially just a screw that slowly turns so that the syringe is pumped at a constant rate.
Model 11. There are nicer models now. So this one actually was a constant flow rate, so I had adjusted pressure as it went, which was something we had to learn along the way, because we didn't keep that in consideration at first. But there are ones that you can keep at a constant pressure or constant flow rate if you look into further models along the line.
For the micro pipette tips, when you were having to micro forge them and put them on, it seems like it'd be very difficult to control what the diameter of the tip is, right? It's like the diameter radius. So did you, when you were doing those tests then, you're saying, oh, we have quantity and these radii, was that a single test or was that like 10 tests? Or, because I don't know how repeatable is it to make a micro pipette with
Right, so the way I got around that when forging it was to just pick a range, and break it, and once it's in break, leave it, measure it, and then we just did this so many times that eventually we had enough tips at each radius. And if we needed more at the smaller one, I'd move it up a little bit so it would break it to the smaller one. I think we ran 40-something tests in total, and the ones that were up on the board,
We went through about like 70 tips. So.
A lot of batches.
Which is less than one device, right? Because a device is 100.
And then also Howard imaged the tips before and after we put the blood through just to accurately measure
That was something that also took a lot of time. So we unfortunately didn't have a digital camera attached to our microscope, so it was a lot of getting steady hands and taking photos with our phones, and then Howard was our imaging expert. And you can imagine having photos of these tips when Chase microforged them, after he microforged them, and after we ran an experiment. That was a lot of imaging done.